Alright, I'm a little bit more tired today. So, let's see if I can actually stay on topic this time. I didn't upload the previous one. Where's my mouse? Alright. I didn't upload the previous video in regards to the equation because, as you know, I like to ramble. But I have defined this one pretty well in the range of consciousness video, A sub t, in so many words. And this is just kind of what goes into this, so to speak, snapshot of who you are with respect to time t. As I think I outlined in that video, as I do in other ones, what you are made of is a lot of many different things. And some of those things are your beliefs and your values and what's going on up here. And what those are made of, well, those can quite literally hold complex values in my worldview. Which is to say that numbers that aren't real anymore, they're quite literally imaginary. That being said, the only reason we need those values is to help us understand really what's going on inside the operating system of who we are. Because where it seems to me, and again, kind of put in your own views if you would, I mean, by all means, but it seems to me, as I kind of look at how others have decided to approach this issue, it's still very much an open issue. You know, why we really haven't been able to put down in terms of an equation who we are, you know. So this is this equation is an encapsulation of who we are. And two, where I would like to push this theta value is in the direction of trying to put real values on things like, you know, so to speak, psychological orderings, or, you know, cluster A, B, or C, for instance. And if I'm just kind of using loose Robert Morian interpretations, figure out how energy is manifesting within the psychology. Where is it coming from? Where is it originating from? I would like to attach values within this theta function. And I believe we can do that as more of like a meta-analysis on the work that's already been done within the clinician's office, you know, to use one example. But that being said, let's kind of trudge along. I've kind of alluded to how these things can hold complex values, and there's a reason I'm sticking it in the power set. I like to use the example of gimbal lock. If all you are given is the classical model of physics, and then you're told to describe with Cartesian coordinates how an object is pitched, yawed, or rotated, at some points you can achieve what is called gimbal lock, where essentially the object becomes locked on an axis and you lose a degree in terms of understanding its rotation, pitch, or yaw. And that's a problem, right? Like, if you can't figure out how this thing is turning with respect to you, then and you're locked, how can we begin to apply this model of physics that used to work so well moving forward? Well, how do we get over it in the first place? Well, with quaternions, it turns out in order to put people quite literally on the moon, I hope you're not a conspiracy theorist thinking otherwise, but in order to put people on the moon, we have quite literally needed complex values, imaginary numbers that help us understand the exact positions of how these objects move through space and time. These are called quaternions, which are essentially 4D balls. What is a 3D ball? It's just a ball. What is a 2D ball? You know what I'm saying? Like, well, that's just a circle. But I'm quite literally using the words as they are, and I'm just simply shifting the dimensions upwards. Is that pretty clear to everyone? You know, so for instance, what does a 1D ball look like in terms of Cartesian coordinates, I would argue that it's probably the line segment, something like that. I say ball, this is probably a piece of a ball. I would say a ball is a closed set, but we can have arguments there about how maybe I've missed the point. Anyway, yeah, that's not up for contest. Like, so for instance, a segment of a ball looks like so, right? Where you can essentially have this value of the ball in 1D space, like you have a segment of it, and the closed portion encapsulates the actual boundary of it. So yeah, I'm thinking of that correctly in 1D space. But hopefully you're getting an idea of how we've, well, one, what a 4D ball is. You can't really picture it. It's impossible to imagine it. But we've needed the understanding of it to help us know where we are in reality. That's not up for debate. Okay. Where I am trying to push the field of psychology is trying to attach, like I said, theta values onto what in some areas are complex superpositions of psychological orderings. And that's, I think Jung definitely touched on that. I know Robert Moore wanted to keep going with it, but I would like to make the claim that I've finished that psychological model that Moore was trying to go for. And now what I'm really trying to push it to, like I said, we need to start putting numerical values on these orderings, especially with respect to time t. Okay? If we can't figure out what's going on up here at any given moment in time, then what basis do we have to make any functional claims about anything with respect to psychology? And we really don't, frankly. In my view, what the DSM has done is great. We do need to understand pathologies, and it is societally useful to do these things in many respects. But what can no longer be argued is just how it's been perverted in so many ways for society to use these fields of knowledge against the common folk, so to speak. So how do we escape it? Well, let's return to science. So CSE simply is the shortened version of conscious subjective experience. I don't know what other words to use for just simply saying that what you are, who you are, at any given moment with respect to time t in the space-time continuum in this world, at any given moment, who you are is exactly what you are paying attention to. Now, what you can pay attention to with respect to our evolved brains is functionally infinite. So we really got to do a better job of understanding what comprises this thing of attention. Now, as I've said, and as I've made the claim, if I can get a grade schooler to focus their attention on me and calm down enough to maybe get off their phones. I don't know what's going on in the classroom these days, but I know phones are an issue. But if we can get a classroom of children to kind of just chill out and focus on one thing and do one thing at a time. My favorite example is the telescope example. I simply have them imagine, with one eye open, what is it like to look through a telescope? So as you notice, and if we have a classroom of children, they're all looking through the room, maybe even at each other, teacher, but with one eye open, you can't really focus on too many things through this toilet paper telescope if you have toilet paper rolls or towel holder rolls, something like that. Towel holder rolls. Paper towel, those little cardboard things. But if you can't really look at too many things going on, right? Well, in this exact example, every single student, including the teacher, has a completely different reference point with respect to time t at any given moment in time and space in that classroom. And that's just through the singular example of trying to pay attention to one thing through this weird cardboard telescope that I'm trying to describe. So if that's landing, if you can simply imagine that your attention can be, so to speak, dumbed down onto one thing, and then if you can imagine that we can go one step farther and say, you can pay attention to nothing. I think some Easterners have written a fair amount of text around that. Or if you can kind of just keep dialing it backward, or forward, to where you can now start paying attention to more things. As you know, we're more than just a weird cardboard example that I can't name or term adequately. We can look at a lot of things. And not just that, we have two eyes. We have peripheral vision, we have depth perception, we have this amazing network of neural synapses, we have this ever-changing environment that we are, in constant flux with, and this is a part of this conscious subjective experience that you are having. Okay, and when I'm really trying to get where I know this is going past the theta value, but where I would like people's understanding to head towards is understandings around the Schrodinger equation. So we like to think of consciousness, or really as things we can touch and observe as so. And what the Schrodinger equation has taught us is that you really can't measure something without interfering with what that thing is doing. And that has led to all kinds of wacky, not just to all kinds of wacky interpretations of science and where to go with it. But it really has led to, seems like now a 100-year standing crisis point where it's just like, what is science to make of any of this? Instead, realize what it is like to be that object. That's kind of the point here. And in order to be that object, one of my favorite examples is the Klein bottle, is to reimagine the framework in which you are making these assumptions. Okay? Rather than thinking of consciousness as this object that we can pathologically measure, attach data values to, seemingly put into a box and touch. Rather than think we can do that without inherently corrupting what's going on there, what if we said instead, we change the assumptions to go, the consciousness is instead a field state. Imagine it instead of you know how it is explained in quantum physics, how it wasn't good enough to measure the exact superposition of an object as it rotates around the sun. You had essentially to understand this as a large ball sitting on a blanket, and how that essentially the mass of this object warped the fabric of space and time. And now as we begin to measure, say for instance Mercury, which we were having a hard time doing back in the day, well, this parabolic elliptical nature can now be explained with absolute precision, if I'm not mistaken. That's essentially how I would like for people to understand the framework of what's going on in terms of this conscious subjective experience. It is a field state You are that fabric. This thing, you're not the sun. You're the thing trying to hold up the sun. And that's where the assumptions need to shift. So that's essentially what's going on here, and I argue with this equation because if you understand what eigenvalues and eigenvectors are, this is exactly what it is. So if I'm not mistaken, eigenvalues look something like so. I forget what the final term is. But essentially all it is saying is that we can, just as I described loosely what you can do with a 4D ball down to a 3D, 2D, 1D, you can start applying those concepts in terms of dimensionality up and down. So I would also like to end this video. I did say how I would like the theta values to begin to map on to psychology. I also want to mention that this term is rotational, okay? Many of the, I would say, grotesque assumptions at this point is that within the vastness of the human psyche or consciousness or whatever superfluous words a lot of people are throwing at this thing nowadays, they like to assume it's functionally infinite, okay? And that's just not going to do it for me anymore. We need to start thinking of these in terms of rotational theta values, okay? Now, this is functionally infinite in terms of how many values you can describe, but in terms of the container of what we're deciding to box this thing inside of, well, now we're not working with superfluous edge points. You know, it must be God. It must be the devil. It's just like, how about we put some bounds on this bad boy? That's what I'm saying. So, I think that's it for now. But I definitely did a lot better job today kind of explaining this thing. So I think this one might also be ready for YouTube. And if you haven't, this isn't just about the math of it, but check out the video I just did on sadomasochism. I like that one. Ta-ta. Thanks for now.